Every magical practitioner knows the moment, that split second when you release a spell into the universe, when intention becomes reality. Science tells us nothing can happen faster than the speed of light, that cause must precede effect. And yet, quantum physics shows us a universe where observation itself changes reality. What happens in that moment when magical will meets quantum possibility?
Welcome back to Synapse and Shadow. I am Tegan Lleuad, and today we're exploring that fascinating intersection where our magical will meets quantum reality. Now, in previous episodes, we've talked about how consciousness affects reality at the quantum level, and we've explored how focused attention can shape our personal quantum fields. But today, we're diving into something both more subtle and more powerful. That precise moment when magical will translates into manifestation. Think about the last spell you cast. There's a distinct sequence that every practitioner recognizes. First, you gather your intention, you focus your will, you build the energy, and then comes that crucial moment, the release. It's not just letting go. It's a precise instant of knowing that your will has become one with universal possibility. Interestingly, quantum physics shows us something remarkably similar. As we've discussed before, when we observe a quantum system, we're not just watching it, we're participating in determining its reality. But here's the key. Observation isn't about forcing an outcome. It's about entering into relationship with possibility itself. This gives us a new way to understand why some of our most carefully planned spells fizzle while others manifest with surprising ease. It's not about how hard we push our will against the universe. It's about how skillfully we dance with quantum possibility. In this episode, we'll explore this dance from three perspectives: the architecture of magical will, the quantum mechanics of possibility, and the psychological state that bridges them. We'll look at practical techniques for working with rather than against quantum uncertainty. And we'll discuss why the moment of release might be even more important than the buildup. When we think of magical will, we often picture force, pushing our desires into reality through sheer determination. But what if we're thinking about it all wrong? What if magical will is less like forcing and more like measuring, the kind of delicate observation that quantum physicists use to study reality at its most fundamental level? Let's start with something we've all experienced. You're casting a spell. You've gathered your energy, focused your intention, and you're ready to release it into the universe. In that moment, you're not just a welder of magic. You're a quantum observer, quite literally helping to determine which of the many possible realities will manifest. But once you've released your will, we're taught to let it go, take a step to the left, and not think about it anymore. We have to accept that by our will, so mote it be. But we all know how difficult that is. Daniel Wegner's research on ironic process theory shows us something pivotal about will and intention. In his famous white bear experiment, he demonstrated that when instructed not to think of a white bear, the processes in the participants' brains forced them to think of nothing but a white bear. Wegner theorized that there were two mental processes responsible: an operating process that attempts to suppress the thought as instructed, and a monitoring process that checks to see if the thought is present, which brings the thoughts back front and center of our attention. When we try too hard not to think about something, we actually increase its presence in our minds. Most witches know this paradox. The spell you obsess over often fails, while the one you cast and genuinely release tends to manifest. So, how do we avoid this trap? How do we release our magical will without falling into the spiral of obsessive thinking? The answer might lie in how quantum physics views possibility itself. Richard Feynman, one of the most innovative quantum physicists of the 20th century, showed us something remarkable about how reality works. At the quantum level, anything traveling from point A to point B doesn't take just one path. It simultaneously takes all possible paths. He called this the sum over histories theory. Only when we observe or measure do these possibilities collapse into one definite path. This quantum perspective offers us a powerful way to approach spell release. Instead of trying not to think about our spell, which we know now will backfire, we can shift our focus to possibility itself. Rather than picturing our magic forcing its way down a narrow path, we can trust it to explore all possible routes to manifestation. Like those quantum particles, our magic often takes unexpected paths, manifesting in ways we didn't anticipate, but ultimately achieving our intended outcome. The key isn't to stop thinking about our spell, it's to think about it differently. When we cast a spell, we're creating conditions where certain possibilities become more probable. It's like opening doors rather than building forced pathways. So, what does that mean for practical magical work? First, it suggests that the art of magical will isn't about how hard we can push. It's about how skillfully we can observe and interact with possibility itself. Think of it like this. When you cast a spell, you're not just launching your intention into the universe. You're creating what quantum physicists call a coherent state, a focused pattern of possibility that increases the likelihood of your desired outcome. Dr. Carol Dweck's research on mindset adds another fascinating layer. She found that people who believe their abilities can grow, which she calls a growth mindset, consistently achieve more than those who believe their abilities are fixed. In magical terms, this suggests that our belief in our capacity to affect reality actually helps create that capacity. Let me share a practical technique that brings all this together. I call it quantum casting. Instead of trying to force one specific outcome or struggling not to think about your spell, you'll learn to work with possibility itself. First, cast your spell as you normally would. But when you reach the point of release, instead of trying to let go completely, imagine your intention exploring multiple paths, like light spreading through a prism. See your magic taking not just the obvious route, but flowing through countless possibilities. For example, if you've cast a spell for prosperity, don't just picture money appearing in your bank account. Allow yourself to imagine multiple channels: a new job opportunity, an unexpected refund, a brilliant business idea, a chance to save money, a valuable skill you could monetize. You're not attached to any of these specific outcomes. You're simply acknowledging the many ways your intention might manifest. This approach has three key benefits. It satisfies your mind's need to engage with the spell without falling into obsession. It aligns with how quantum reality actually works, and it opens you to recognize manifestation when it comes through unexpected channels. Think of yourself as a quantum observer, creating a field of heightened probability rather than forcing a single outcome. You're not trying not to think about your spell, you're thinking about it expansively. Dr. Gabriel Auden's research supports this approach. Her studies show that while positive thinking alone can actually reduce our likelihood of success, combining optimism with awareness of multiple possibilities leads to better outcomes. She calls this mental contrasting, and it's remarkably similar to what we're doing in quantum casting. Would you like to try a simple version of this technique right now? If you're in a safe space to close your eyes, go ahead and do so. If you're driving or need to stay alert, just listen and try this later. Take a deep breath and think of a spell you've recently cast or one you're planning to cast, and hold that intention in your mind. Now, instead of focusing on one specific outcome, begin to imagine your intention as a point of light. See it spreading out like light refracted through a prism, exploring different paths of manifestation. Don't try to control or direct these paths. Just observe them unfolding, each beam as strong and powerful as the original. Now imagine each of these individual beams of light intersecting with other prisms and multiplying even further, increasing the paths and probability of manifestation 100 or even 1,000-fold. Notice how this feels different from forcing a single outcome. You're not trying to make anything happen. You're allowing your magic to explore all possible routes to manifestation. Like Feynman's quantum particles, your intention is free to take any path. If you notice yourself wanting to grab onto one specific outcome, gently remind yourself that you're not limiting possibilities, you're expanding them. You're trying not to think about your spell. You're thinking about it quantumly, embracing all its potential expressions. When you're ready, take a deep breath and open your eyes if they were closed. This is how we work with magical will in harmony with quantum reality. Instead of fighting against our mind's tendency to return to important thoughts, we transform how we hold those thoughts. We become observers of possibility rather than forcers of outcome. Notice how it feels different from your usual approach to spell work. And remember, you're not trying to force the universe to bend to your will. You are learning to dance with quantum possibility. In part 2, we'll explore the architecture of intention, how we can build our magical will to work with rather than against quantum reality. We'll look at what makes magical intention different from ordinary wanting. We'll explore how to create coherent intention fields and discover how Feynman's diagrams can help us visualize the way our map moves through space and time. Welcome back to Synapse and Shadow. In the last segment, we explored how magical will works with quantum possibility. Now let's dive into what makes magical intention different from ordinary wanting or wishing. When you decide you want something, let's say a new job or a new house, your ordinary thinking mind starts planning and worrying. But when you cast a spell for that same goal, something very different happens. Neuroscience shows us this isn't just a subjective experience, it's a measurable shift in how your brain functions. Studies comparing meditation to ordinary thought reveal distinct patterns of neural activity. When we're in a state of ordinary wanting, our brain's default mode network, which is associated with self-referential thinking and worry, is highly active. But in states of focused magical intention, like during spell work or deep meditation, we see a shift. The default mode network quiets, and we see increased activity in areas associated with present moment awareness and focused attention. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's research on flow states gives us another window into this difference. Flow, that state where action and awareness merge, where we are fully immersed in an activity and time seems to shift, shares many characteristics with the consciousness we achieve in successful magical work. We're simultaneously highly focused and deeply relaxed, fully present, yet expanded beyond our ordinary sense of self. And the HeartMath Institute has shown that this isn't just happening in our brains. When we enter these states of coherent intention, our heart's electromagnetic field changes in ways we can measure. This field extends beyond our bodies, creating what we might call an intention field in the space around us. Dr. William Tiller's research at Stanford University takes this even further. His work on intention imprinted electrical devices showed that focused human intention can actually change the physical properties of space itself. This might explain something we discussed in the last episode, how a regularly used ritual space feels different, holds a charge even when no one is actively working there. Think about what this means for magical practice. We're not just sending thoughts into the void when we cast a spell. We're creating coherent fields of intention that interact with the quantum fabric of reality. Like a skilled quantum observer, we're learning to collapse specific possibilities into manifestation. But here's the key. These intention fields require more than just mental focus. Research on embodied cognition shows that our entire system needs to be aligned with our intention. This is why traditional magical practice involves physical movement, spoken words, and tangible tools. We're not just thinking about our intention, we're embodying it. And this is where Feynman's approach to quantum physics offers us another valuable insight. He created a revolutionary way to visualize how particles interact. Imagine drawing a simple map of all the possible paths something could take to get from point A to point B. In these drawings, when paths cross, they create points of interaction, moments where something new could happen. Think about casting a spell this way. Your intention, like one of Feynman's particles, doesn't just travel in a straight line. It moves through reality, creating intersection points, moments where your magic meets opportunity. These points of intersection are where manifestation often occurs, frequently in ways we didn't expect. For example, you cast a spell for a new job. Instead of attention traveling straight to the perfect job listing, it might intersect with a friend who knows someone hiring, or it may cross paths with a class that teaches you a crucial new skill, or it may connect with an opportunity to volunteer that leads to a paid position. Each intersection point creates a possibility for manifestation. This way of thinking about magical intention helps explain why manifestation often comes through unexpected channels. And this brings us to something fascinating: synchronicity. Jung defined these meaningful coincidences as acausal connecting principles, but through a quantum lens, we might understand them differently. When we're working with coherent intention fields, we begin to notice relevant patterns emerging, almost as if reality itself is offering us feedback about our magical work. So now I'll share a practical technique for working with these interaction points. I call it crossroads casting. Like the points where paths intersect in Feynman's drawings, crossroads have always been powerful places in magical tradition. They represent places of possibility where different paths meet and new directions can be chosen. This technique helps you create and recognize these magical interaction points in your own life. You'll need your field notes journal for this one, as you'll want to track what unfolds. First, cast your spell as you normally would, but as you're building energy, begin to consciously identify 3 different areas of your life where your intention might manifest. For instance, if you're working on abundance, you might identify your job, your creative projects, and your social network. Now, in each of these areas, take one small aligned action within 24 hours of casting your spell. These actions don't need to be big. Send that email you've been putting off. Organize your workspace. Reach out to a client. Each action creates what Feynman would call an interaction vertex, a point where your magical intention can connect with physical reality. The key is to stay alert for unexpected connections between these points. Like coherent fields interacting, you might notice patterns emerging, synchronicities that show you where your magic is finding purchase in reality. Document these patterns in your field notes. Pay special attention to recurring themes or symbols, unexpected connections between seemingly unrelated events, opportunities that arise spontaneously, and changes in how people respond to you in these areas. This creates a feedback loop between your magical intention and physical reality. This feedback loop is crucial because it helps us understand how our magical will is moving through reality. Remember those coherent fields we talked about? The HeartMath Institute's research shows that when we maintain coherent states, we actually become more sensitive to subtle information. We're literally tuning our awareness to recognize these points of possibility. Think of it like developing any other skill. Athletes call it being in the zone, that state where they can read the field and anticipate where the play is going. Musicians talk about feeling where the music wants to go. In magical practice, we're developing the same kind of refined awareness, but for probability itself. Let me give a concrete example. A practitioner I worked with cast a spell for career advancement. Instead of just focusing on her current job, she identified 3 areas: her professional skills, her network, and her creative projects. Within 24 hours, she signed up for a relevant online course. She reached out to a former colleague just to say hello, and she started a blog about her field. Within weeks, patterns began emerging. A topic from her course sparked a popular blog post, which caught her former colleague's attention, leading to an introduction that opened up a whole new career path. None of these connections were forced. They emerged naturally from creating multiple interaction points for her intention. The power of this approach is that it works with quantum reality rather than against it. Instead of trying to force one specific outcome, you're creating conditions where favorable outcomes become more probable. You're learning to dance with possibility. In our next segment, we'll explore the third piece of this quantum magical work, how to recognize and work with probability itself. We'll look at specific techniques for probability manipulation in spell work, and we'll discuss how to know when to push and when to let the universe lead the dance. Before we do that, take a moment to check your field notes. Are you noticing patterns in your magical workings? Places where intention and opportunity seem to intersect? Those are your quantum interaction points, and they're about to become even more interesting. This is Synapse and Shadow. I'm Tegan Lleuad, and I'll be right back. And we're back. So far, we've explored how magical will interacts with quantum reality and how to create interaction points for manifestation. Now let's talk about something every practitioner struggles with: working with probability. Think about shuffling a deck of cards. Before you draw, every card has a certain probability of being pulled. But research in quantum biology is showing us that even nature uses quantum uncertainty to its advantage. Plants use quantum effects in photosynthesis, birds use quantum entanglement for navigation, and our own sense of smell likely relies on quantum tunneling. What if magic works the same way? What if, instead of trying to force a specific outcome, we could learn to work with probability itself, to surf the quantum waves of possibility? Dr. Julia Mossbridge's research on presentiment offers us an intriguing glimpse into how this might work. Her studies show that our nervous system responds to important events seconds before they occur, not through precognition in the usual sense, but through what she calls time-reversed effects, as if our consciousness isn't quite as bound by linear time as we thought. This aligns with what many experienced practitioners report, that sense of knowing when a spell is working, even before a physical manifestation occurs. It's not about predicting the future, but about becoming sensitive to probability shifts in the present. Gary Klein's research on expert intuition adds another fascinating layer to this understanding. Studying how experienced firefighters and emergency responders make split-second decisions, he found they weren't just guessing. They were pattern matching based on subtle clues their conscious minds hadn't yet processed. This is exactly what happens as we develop our magical practice. We begin to notice subtle shifts in probability, not through a conscious analysis, but through what Klein would call recognition primed decision making. We develop a feel for when conditions are right, when our magic is finding purchase in reality. But here's the challenge. How do we maintain clear magical intention without becoming attached to specific outcomes? Research on open monitoring meditation offers us some insights. This form of meditation, where practitioners maintain broad, open awareness without focusing on any particular object, creates a distinct neural state. We see increased activity in areas associated with awareness and decreased activity in areas associated with grasping and attachment. This is the state we want to cultivate in our magical practice. Clear intention combined with open awareness. Like a quantum observer who knows that measuring too precisely can collapse possibility, we learn to hold our magical intention with just the right touch. Let me share a practical technique that brings this all together. I call it probability weaving. And here's how probability weaving works. Instead of trying to force an outcome or completely letting go, you'll learn to sense and work with probability itself. First, after you've cast your spell, take a moment each day to scan your environment with what I call soft attention. This is similar to open monitoring meditation. You're not looking for anything specific, but you're staying alert to patterns and possibilities. Pay attention to three things: subtle shifts in your environment, unexpected connections or coincidences, and that gut feeling that opportunity is near. Think of it like learning to read the wind if you were sailing. At first, you might only notice strong gusts, but with practice, you begin to feel the subtle changes in air pressure, tiny shifts in temperature. You notice the way birds fly before a weather change. In your field notes, start tracking what I call probability markers. These might be dreams that feel particularly significant, recurring symbols or numbers, unexpected mentions of things related to your intention, that tingling sensation that tells you something is shifting. And here's where it gets really interesting. Like those quantum biology systems we mentioned, you're not trying to force reality into a particular pattern. Instead, you're learning to recognize when probability is naturally shifting in your favor. When you notice these shifts, that's your cue to take aligned action, but with a light touch. Like a surfer catching a wave, you're working with the energy that's already there. I will give you an example of how this works in practice. Let's say you've cast a spell for abundance. Instead of obsessively checking your bank account or constantly worrying about money, you maintain this state of soft attention. You might notice that conversations about passive income naturally arise in different contexts. First with a colleague, then overhearing strangers at a cafe, then stumbling across an article. Or perhaps you keep encountering the same book title through completely different channels. It was mentioned by a friend. It appeared in your social media feed. literally falling off a shelf when you walk by. These aren't just random events. They're probability markers showing you where reality is becoming more plastic, more open to change. What makes these true probability markers rather than just coincidence is their pattern of meaningful repetition through different channels. One random mention of something might be a coincidence, but when the same theme or opportunity keeps appearing through completely different and seemingly unconnected pathways, that's a probability shift in action. These markers often appear in threes, something practitioners have noted for centuries. And interestingly, probability theory suggests three similar events are statistically significant enough to indicate a pattern. The key is learning to recognize and work with these markers without forcing them. Remember those quantum interaction points? This is where they become really useful. Each probability marker is like a signpost showing you where these points are naturally occurring. But, and this is important, we have to be willing to be surprised. Some of the strongest possibility shifts come through channels we'd never consciously choose. This is where the research on presentiment becomes practically useful. That gut feeling that tells you to take a different route home, or to check your email one more time, or to attend that event you almost skipped. That's your system recognizing probability shifts before your conscious mind catches up. The more you practice this, the more sensitive you become to these subtle shifts. It's like developing any other skill. Your pattern recognition improves, your intuition sharpens, and you begin to sense when probability is becoming more fluid. Let me share one final technique for working with these patterns. I call it probability mapping. In your field notes journal, create what looks like a spider web of connections. Center, write your magical intention. Each time you notice a related event, synchronicity, or opportunity, add it to your map, noting not just what happened, but how it occurred. The key is to record everything without judgment. Sometimes what seems like an insignificant connection turns out to be part of a larger pattern. That causal conversation at the coffee shop might connect 3 weeks later to a job opportunity that perfectly matches your intention. As your map grows, you'll see the patterns emerging. Common themes, repeated numbers, recurring situations. These patterns aren't just coincidences. They're showing you where probability is becoming more fluid, where your magic is finding purchase in reality. Take a moment now to think about patterns you might have already noticed in your magical workings. These coincidences you've been missing, they might be showing you exactly where probability is shifting in your favor. Coming up next in our final segment, we'll look at how to use these probability maps to guide your magical practice, and we'll explore some specific case studies of how this approach has worked for other practitioners. Welcome back to Synapse and Shadow. Let's look at how all of this works in practice by exploring some real examples of probability magic in action. One of the most fascinating patterns I've observed emerges in group workings. Last week, we talked about constructive interference, which is when multiple practitioners work with the same intention and waves amplify each other when they align. The Pear Lab at Princeton found something similar in their studies. Group working with coherent intention showed stronger effects than individuals working alone. A specific example is a group of practitioners in my community. They decided to work on environmental healing for a local watershed. Instead of forcing a specific outcome, they used the probability mapping technique we discussed. What emerged was fascinating. Seemingly unrelated events began connecting in meaningful ways. A local science teacher started a water testing program. A community cleanup event spontaneously organized. Grant funding became available for restoration projects. Each event alone might seem coincidental, but the pattern of connection revealed probability at work. But probability work isn't always smooth sailing. Let me share some common challenges practitioners encounter and how we can handle them. One of the biggest challenges we face is what I call probability backlash, trying too hard to force connections and ending up more tangled than before. Remember our discussion about Wegner's ironic process theory? The same principle applies here. The harder you try to force probability, the more it tends to slip away. Another common challenge is misreading the signs. Not every coincidence is a probability marker. This is where your field notes become crucial. When you track patterns over time, true probability shifts become clearer. They show up through multiple channels, often in sets of 3, and they feel qualitatively different from random coincidence. Then there's the energy drain that can come from maintaining too much awareness. Like any form of quantum observation, probability work requires energy. Signs of energetic overwhelm might include feeling unusually tired after your magical work, seeing patterns in everything, even when they're not meaningful, becoming overly anxious about possibly missing a sign, or obsessing over every little coincidence. The solution isn't to stop working with probability, it's to develop better boundaries and clearer discernment. Here's what I recommend. First, establish a clear framework for your probability work. Set specific times for actively probability scanning rather than trying to maintain it constantly. Create a regular grounding practice. Use your field notes to track patterns objectively rather than emotionally. And learn to recognize your personal signs of energetic depletion. Second, develop what I call probability hygiene. Just as scientists clean their equipment between experiments, we need to clear our magical space between workings. This might mean regular cleansing rituals, meditation to clear your pattern recognition filters, physical actions that help you reset, like walking in nature or taking a salt bath. Clear boundaries between different magical workings. Third, and perhaps most importantly, learn to work with natural possibility flows rather than against them. This is where Feynman's understanding of quantum paths become practically useful. Instead of trying to force probability down one narrow channel, look for places where multiple paths naturally converge. Think of it like working with water. You can try to force water uphill, but it's much easier to identify where it naturally wants to flow and work with those currents. Similarly, when you're working with probability, look for natural points of intersection in your life, times when change is already happening, places where less effort produces more effect, and situations where multiple factors naturally align. As we wrap up today's exploration of magical will and quantum probability, remember, you're not trying to muscle reality into submission. You're learning to dance with quantum possibilities, to work with probability rather than against it. Think back to where we started, that moment of releasing a spell into the universe. Now you understand that release isn't about letting go completely, nor is it about maintaining rigid control. It's about maintaining clear intention while allowing probability to find its optimal path. In your Field Notes journal, you'll find new pages for probability mapping and tracking manifestation patterns. Use them to start building your own understanding of how probability moves in your magical practice. Remember, this is a skill that develops with practice, and don't expect to master it overnight. Share your experiences in the comments either on YouTube or on the show notes pages at podcast.teganleuad.com. For links to additional resources, check those show notes on the website. And remember to download your Field Notes journal pages to start tracking your own probability patterns. This is Tegan Lleuad reminding you to keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep dancing between worlds.